I've had my ups and my downs.
I think it's an absolutely breakthrough experience.
Welcome to the Physical Performance Show, the show designed to inspire the pursuit of your physical best performance. I'm your host, Brad Beer. Listen in as we delve into how the world's top physical performers achieve their success, as well as the highs, the lows, and the journey of getting there. Let's get ready, set, let's go. Listeners, welcome to another episode of the Physical Performance Show, and I'm sitting today with an athlete that I've admired for many years. Back in my junior triathlon days, I used to read the Bicycling Australia magazine back when it was black and white. I think it might have gone colour. I remember seeing this gentleman pictured regularly. I was maybe 15, 16, and then years later here at the physio practice, this gentleman's name appeared in my diary, and I remember thinking, is that the Nick Gates? And sure enough, the gentleman that came in was the Nick Gates. So, Nick Gates, that's a loft introduction. But, mate, welcome to the show.
Thanks very much, Brad. Pleasure to be here.
And, Nick, straight out of the gate, what's one thing that scares Nick Gates?
Ooh, scares me. Actually, after your intro, Brad, age scares me. I've just finally started to feel my age in the last few years. But no, all jokes aside, I'm not really sure what scares me. Maybe the unknown.
Yeah. What about the unknown, Nick?
Well, as you're an athlete for basically, 2/3 of my life so far, I've always known what I was doing and where my focus was and where I was going. But once you retire, it's a whole different world out there. So you have to not start again, but go on a different path and find your way. And sometimes that can be difficult.
I mean, how have you navigated that? Because you came, and we'll go into your career, but you came from years at elite road racing, cycling, then into a career in management in cycling professionally as well. How did you navigate? What was that first season like at the end of your racing career?
I think the first one was relatively easy. The first 6 months after I retired at the end of 2008, was not a problem. It was my decision to retire, so I was happy to step away and move back to Australia with the family and settle down. I thought that'd be me for the rest of my days, but another 6 months went by, and I sort of missed everything to do with the competition, and I missed Europe, and I remember speaking to my wife, and I think if you spoke to her, you'd probably get a different story than you get off me. I think I was probably a bit of a punish to live with for a while, and she said, well, okay, if you get a job, we'll go back. So that night I was on the phone. The next morning I said, I start in 3 weeks. So pack up the kids. I'll see you over there. I went back over, and I managed a team called Saxo Bank for a couple of years. I was a director sportif there, and we had a few years there, and then back to Australia. And
Nick, on the management role, Saxo Bank, what years were you managing the team at that stage?
I think that was 2010. 11 and 12, and then moved back to Australia for a year, and got an opportunity to go somewhere else and do something involved in cycling. I actually ran a cycling academy out of a sports centre in Thailand. So we've only been home for a week, so I was there for a little less than 2 years, and we're just settling back in now. And my wife's said we're never moving again, so I've got to settle in.
So we'll have you on the Gold Coast for years to come. And so, Nick, in terms of your professional cycling career, where did it all start? I know you grew up in New South Wales, country town. How did it start for you?
It started out of a lot of ways that young kids get into sport is they follow their parents. My mother and father weren't big cycling families. We're from Taree, New South Wales, and My father had 30 years on the ciggies and said, I've got to give these up. And he gave them up one day and got on the bike. He rode as a young bloke and he got back on the bike at club level, and I followed him there. And I remember borrowing a track bike from the club and having a few goes up at Wingham at the velodrome there, and it just progressed from there. I really enjoyed the cycling. As a young kid in rural also, I was playing football, tennis, boxing, I was riding horses. We were doing a lot of different sports, and it's looking back now that I got kids, I take my hat off to my mum and dad, because all we did was travel around the countryside chasing sporting events.
And at what point, Nick, with the multiple sports you were participating in, did you realise that you had a natural talent and ability on the bike and start to really discover your potential?
I'd say I started on the bike when I was 13 or 14 years of age, and at the time my father organised a triathlon, which was the Taree Triathlon, which was quite a big race back in the day. You had the Ampole series with Dubbo and all these northern New South Wales races, which were very good, and he organised Taree Tri, and I remember a couple of the triathletes coming and staying with us. Back in the day, these guys had absolutely no money. They'd turn up in a combi van and they'd race in their Speedos, but I just thought they were gods. I loved it. And I got to know quite a few of those guys there, and that was my passion, actually, triathlon. And I competed in triathlon for the next 3 years, and I entered the Australian Ironman, which is out at Foster, which is only 30 kilometres away from Taree, as a young guy, and I turned 18 2 days before the race, so I was probably one of the youngest competitors ever to do it. But we had a good group of guys that were training, and that was my passion. But after that, I qualified for Hawaii from that race, and I literally couldn't walk for probably 2 weeks after the race, and I never really recovered within the next month or two. My father said, if you go to Hawaii, it'll cost 10 grand for a week. Why don't you go to Europe on the bike? You might get 3 or 4 months out of your money and go and try that. So that's the path I took when I was 18 and a half years of age.
Wow. So you finished the Ironman Triathlon, which for listeners that are aware of Ironman, 3.8k swim, 180k ride, marathon off the bike. What was your time at 18 years of age? You were, I believe, first or second off the bike, weren't you?
Yeah, I was first off the bike that year with a guy called Rod Sidaro that went on to win the race. And I remember getting off the bike thinking, my longest run's 16k. I've got to run a full marathon. So I shuffled and crawled my way through the run and ended up doing 10 hours and 9 seconds.
Oh, so, wow. Enough to qualify for Hawaii, though.
Yeah.
And then your dad gave you some perspective around that 10 grand.
Yeah.
And so what happened? You got on a plane?
Yeah, well, then I continued to chase cycling then, and it took me another couple of years till I really got going on the bike. And from there I would race the state open races and the northern New South Wales races, and just gradually getting better and better. And in 93 was my first trip away to Europe. I went over and I billeted with a family in Holland, and I was there for 4 months. And there was a group of 6 or 8 Australians with 6 or 8 Dutch guys, and we went around and raced in Europe as young guys in 93, and it was a great experience. And at the end of the year we came back, and then I thought, okay, that was my year. Now I really want to try and force my way into the Institute of Sport. So back then we had a national series running, and you needed to qualify for the Institute if you weren't selected in the first 10 at the beginning of the year. And I wasn't, so I had a big journey in front of me if I wanted to lock in a spot there for 95. So I had quite a good season in 94. I was second at the National Road Championships up at Yamundi. And I forced my way into the Institute for 1995.
So at that stage, how old were you in years approximately?
Oh, no, that's 21 years. How old am I now? Oh, gee, I was 23.
Okay.
23, which is a little bit on the old side compared to now. I mean, there's a lot of young guys. Cycling's changed a tad. They have a under 23 category now, and you don't turn once you once you're out of the under 23s, if you're not professional, it's a really hard gig to try and get a professional contract. Where back in the day there was no under 23s; it was just amateur and professional until '96 when everything turned pro-am, and that changed the scenery of cycling.
And Nick, back in Europe before you got back to forge your way into the AIS program, did you experience some success when you were racing over there with your
Yeah, what happened is I went away in '94 again off my own bat, and I'd spoken to the manager from the Institute and the Australian cycling team, and they said we might call on you for a couple of races throughout the year. So if you're in Europe and you've funded your own trip over there, and we need you for a race or two, we'll call you and see how you go. So I honed in on that, knowing that was a big opportunity, and that call came, and I went to a race in it was the Eastern Bloc. It's called the Peace Race. Started in many years ago. It's one of the oldest races in the history of cycling, and I went and raced there for the national team, and that was the first time we raced together with Robbie McEwen and Hank Vogels and a lot of the guys who we went on to have long careers together. So that was my first taste of international cycling with the national team.
Yeah, wow. So, and you were part of the AIS then, which was really in its sort of formative, hitting its stride years, wasn't it, back in those?
Yeah, we had the former coach was an East German gentleman called Heiko Salzburg, and he basically shaped Australian cycling. He came in '91 to the Institute in Canberra, and really improved everyone's, I guess, international exposure, because before that, you had the Aussie stalwarts like a Phil Anderson and Alan Piper, Neil Stevens. These guys paved their own way. But once the Institute was in place, it really gave you a good stepping stone, a great opportunity to be seen by the professional teams in Europe.
And were those names like Phil Anderson names that you were looking up to as path runners for your career?
For sure. I remember back when we were kids in Taree growing up, as I said, we had a good group there, and we always used to wear the team kit as young guys and go out and race each other out training around the roads of northern New South Wales, and it was a brilliant time of our lives, and we aspired to become our heroes in cycling. And yeah, Phil Anderson was certainly one of those guys. And
because back then there was no SBS daily coverage around the clock of the tour, right? So you were relying on Bicycling Australia magazines and
Oh, exactly. We'd get you'd normally see the Tour de France results and the photos probably in end of September here in Australia. So it was a long wait. So that was there was no internet, there was certainly no SBS or TV coverage. It was a very minority sport. We only had 3 professionals in Europe at the time.
And so traction was being built, obviously, with your career. You were starting to turn some heads. And where did the victory in the Commonwealth Bank Cycle Classic, what year did that fall for you in?
That was 1996, and that was the Olympic year, Atlanta, and that was the change of cycling. There was no more professional amateur. That's when it became pro-am. So they had different categories of teams, Cat 1, Cat 2, Cat 3 teams, but you had the opportunity then to race the Tour de France winners at that period, race all the big teams. So that was a big stepping stone for us as young guys. We had a really good group of guys out of all over Australia who based ourselves in Canberra, and we'd race in Australia till the end of April or mid-April, and then we'd head over to Europe for the summer and come back beginning of October for the Commonwealth Bank Classic. But that was the first year pro-am, so we went to Tour of Tasmania earlier in the year, and I had some success there, and then I went on to win the Australian Championships in Centennial Park in around beginning of April.
And how did you claim that victory? What was it? Did you break away or? Yeah,
it was a funny little course. It was only 4.5 or 5k round with a solid little climb in each lap, and it was a 200k race. So it was a step up for us young guys. In the amateurs, the world title the year before, I think the World Championships was 165k. So it was a big step up for all of us. But yeah, I went on to win that. There was a group away, and I got across to that group with probably about 80k to go, and I was going very well at the time, and I ended up splitting the group, and there were four guys left, and I went alone with 2 laps to go and went to the finish by myself. So it was a good day.
And at that point, so it was the Australian title, Commonwealth Bank Classic. You were really one of the, if not the key name, in Australian cycling.
Yeah, I had a very successful year that year, and I came back from the European trip, and I went on to start the Commonwealth Bank Classic, which was quite a big race back then. It was an international race, and a lot of good Germans and Europeans would come out, and I was lucky enough to come away with a win that year, and it was actually in front of a guy that had a long career named Jens Voigt. He was second overall, and the following year Jens actually joined our team. So Jens became a part of the Australian team for 97, and we had a really, really successful first 2 years. It was very good.
I remember the Commonwealth Bank Classic coming through my hometown of Grafton, which is really cycling's big in Grafton, and so I think I even had one of the little Commonwealth Bank hats maybe at one point.
Oh, yeah.
It was pre my triathlon interest.
Oh, exactly. That's I had that also. The race used to come through Taree, and I remember as a young kid watching it, and it was very inspiring.
And so at this point, what was your father thinking of the $10,000 investment that he said go and
I think he thought it was a pretty good idea. I think if you ask him, he'll think any of his ideas are pretty good. But no, that was the turning point where I decided that I was going to chase a career in cycling, and I don't have any regrets.
So what were the next steps then, Nick? So obviously, you went on to ride, correct me if I'm wrong, 2 Tour de France's?
Yep.
2. So what are the next steps then in your career from, winning major race like the Commonwealth Bank Classic, Australian title? What happened next?
So then we became paramount that Europe was going to be our home. So it was a big decision. It is a big decision to make for an Australian if you want to become a cyclist. You live in Europe 10 months of the year. You leave at the end of January and you come home beginning of November. So yeah, it was a stepping stone. We're a professional team and a pretty competitive professional team, and we had a very good reputation as hard-working guys, the Australians. And I think that comes back to, if you make a decision to give up your life to do this for a long time away from home and family and friends, you want to make the best out of it. You want to give 100%. So from there, I had a pretty serious injury at the end of 97. I had a ruptured Achilles tendon, and I had
completely ruptured.
Yeah, and people, I'd had so many experts coming to me telling me what to do, and I was about to go under the knife actually and get it operated on. And my second cousin's Phil Kearns, who was captain of the Wallabies, and that actually ended his career. He had a torn Achilles tendon. It snapped, and he had it. Well, I guess you have to have an operation if it snaps. Brad, you know more than me. I don't know what I'm talking about, but
you're doing very well.
But he said if you can get around the operation, try and avoid it. So I had my foot cast in plaster for 4 months. And I was back on the Gold Coast, and I thought, oh, gee, this is my career over. So, of course, I did what every young guy does and went and did a bar course and thought I'll become a barman. That sounds like a good idea.
Oh, wow.
So I was here for 4 months and got the cast off, and it was coming towards the end of the season. I had nothing for 99 going forward, so I had to really squeeze in. I had 4 weeks left before the Commonwealth Bank Classic, and I hadn't been on a bike for 4 months. So I went over to New Caledonia to do a race. A friend of mine here from the Gold Coast organised a team, Steve Rooney, and we put together a team. And I went over to New Cali with about 10 days riding after 4 months, and I did that 10-day race, and I got good condition out of that, and went to the bank race, and I won 2 stages and finished 4th overall. So then I had a German team sign me up for 99.
What was that? Who was that German team?
That team was called Olympia Dortmund. It was a team where a couple of fellow Australians were already there, a Gold Coaster, Jason Phillips, and another Australian, Scott McGorry. So I moved to Dortmund in Germany and had a little apartment there, and was alone and racing there in 99 and had a pretty good year. I went to Tour of Japan and I was 2nd overall and won the mountain stage there, and I was riding pretty well. And then the next 2 years was again in Germany, and then in 2002, I think it was, I turned professional for Lotto and went and rode in a team with Robbie McEwen.
So that was, and that German team, that was your first professional signing, is that right? You were part of the team though, the Australian team, right?
Yeah, that was professional. I've been professional since '96.
Yeah,
and it was the same level of team as the giant Australian team at the time, but the team only lasted 2 years and they lost the funding.
Yep.
And so all of us guys had to search for European teams.
I remember it as Giant, actually, because I remember getting on a Giant bike as a junior triathlete and thinking, you guys are riding them, it must be good.
Yeah, exactly.
so that was all right, got it. And then Nick, there was the Sydney Olympic Games in that league 2000, obviously. Were you in vying for selection for the road race?
2000,
there?
I wasn't. I was injured. 96 was the year I missed out. I was basically reserve. I'd won the 2nd selection race, and I was first Australian in the first selection race. So I thought I'd be pretty close to being in, but as it turned out, it was the first year it was Pro-Am, so there were a lot of good riders in Europe that, it's only a 5-man team. And even though majority of those guys raced in those early season races, I never did the 3rd race, which is in Isle of Man. And, looking back on it at the time, I was like, it doesn't matter, I'll go to the next one. Hindsight's a beautiful word. 2000 came round, I was injured. So, yeah, there was no Olympics, no Sydney for me.
And was that tough sitting on the sideline both Olympic Games?
Yeah, especially 96, where I could have been there, but there was also a drama there in the women's team. Kathy Watt won the Olympics in 92 at Barcelona, and she was a non-selection for 96, but it went down the road of a court case, and there was a lot of drama involved. And as I said, I was a young guy just starting my career, and I said, it's not a problem, I'll have a crack at the next one, but it never came. So,
is that a regret of your career?
It would have been nice. Is it a regret? No, it's not a regret. Yeah. No, I didn't get an Olympic berth. That's all.
Yeah. And Nick, so 2 years with the German team.
Yep.
German team. What was next after?
And then I signed for Lotto, and I went to the Belgian team.
Yep.
I was seeing Robbie, and you see all the Australians at every race. You go to a race and you'd see the 10 Aussies riding for 8 different teams, riding together in the bunch and talking, or sitting in the village before the depart having coffee, and that's how we were as Aussies, because we grew up out of that institute mould, and we all went our own way to different teams. But at the races, it stood out that the Australians were pretty tight. So Robbie was looking for someone to help him in the sprints going forward in 2003 and 04, and I had the opportunity, and I remember the team coming to watch me at a race in Germany. I had quite a good ride, and I got the contract. So that was the start of the top class cycling, going to the Grand Tours.
So that started the Grand Tours.
Yeah, and that was a completely different world that I was used to.
What was the difference?
The difference was that the longest race I'd ever ridden was 10 days, and I remember the first year on the team in Lotto, I rode the Tour of Italy, which is 21 days. It's the same as the Tour de France. And the difference between 10 days and 21 days is pretty taxing on the body, but I had a pretty good recovery. I was able to recover each day, and I don't think I got better, but I didn't drop off as much as a lot of other guys. So it was like I improved as the race went on, which was new to me. I hadn't done a 21-day race before, and I remember riding that, and and then it was a week till Tour de Suisse, which is also a big race. It's 10 days long, and I went home for a week and then went to Tour de Suisse, and I was riding very well there. I was probably one of the best in our team, and they said, okay, you're going to the Tour de France. So the Tour de France was only 10 days after the Tour de Suisse, so I'd ridden Tour of Italy, a week Tour de Suisse, and then 10 days to the Tour. So I got there a little bit overdone. And
what year was this, Nick? This was
20. I think this was maybe it was 203.
Yeah.
And it was a big wake up call to the Grand Tours. They're just another level.
And what was, first stage one, was it a prologue time trial?
Yeah, it was actually, because it was a centenary tour.
Oh wow!
It started under the Eiffel Tower, actually, the prologue. So we rolled off the ramp under the Eiffel Tower. It was a very iconic year to do the tour. I remember there was 5 Aussies that did the tour that year, and because it was a centenary year, we went to the Australian consulate in Paris and we met everyone and all the delegates. I'm like, wow, this is pretty good.
So you're in the starting gate.
Excuse me.
Under the Eiffel Tower, in front of the Eiffel Tower, centenary year of the Tour de France, your first Tour de France.
Yeah.
Ridden 2 previous Grand Tours. What's going through your head as the boy beating around the bush from Taree? What were you thinking? You remember it?
No, I was very... At that time in your career, I think you're into it, so you don't really see the magnitude of what it is until you've done it, or until you stand on the other side of the fence and you're looking in to really realise how big it was. But it was a big moment, and it was a special time in my life, and it was a big year that year, but it was definitely a big introduction to what I was going to do for the next 8 or 9 years.
Wow! So can you remember how you went in that very first time trial? Because at this stage in the cycling world, what was your sort of forte?
When I first came to the team, I was there to help Robbie. And as I said, I did the Giro, and then I went to Tour de Suisse, and we had a couple of guys in our team who were our leaders in the mountains, and one was Rick Verbrugge. He'd up until that point held the fastest ever time trial in a Grand Tour at the Giro. He averaged 55.5k an hour. And we also had the famous Eddie Merckx's son, Axel Merckx, in our team. And I was the guy that was supposed to help Robbie on the flats, but I had such good condition after the Giro. I went to Tour de Suisse and I was actually climbing with these guys. So the team management didn't know what they had in me. They didn't know if I was going down that road of these skinny little mountain goats, or I was going to be, in Robbie's train and helping him. And after that tour, I'd made a decision. I'm pretty happy to ride along with Robbie and be part of the sprint train, because those guys, it's a whole different sport. If you're a climber within cycling and the overall contenders, it's a really brutal game to, everything has to be, it's the same in any sport, but it's the weight loss and the power to weight ratio is so important, and I'm not the smallest guy, so.
And how did that first year in the Tour de France finish for the team and yourself individually?
Robbie actually had the green jersey the entire tour. It probably wasn't his best season for condition. I think I can't remember what happened. I think maybe he had an accident early in the tour, and we were fighting it the whole tour. And he went on to the Champs-Élysées in the green jersey. And after the first intermediate sprint, he only had 1 point in front of Baden Cook, a fellow Australian who rode for the French team Français de Jeu. And the second intermediate sprint, Cookie won. So they came down to the finish, level pegging after 3 weeks of racing, 3,700 kilometres. Whoever basically crossed the line first would win the green jersey. 2 Australians. Yeah, and Robbie finished third on the stage, and Baden was second behind a Frenchman, and he handed over the green jersey. So it was gutting, for 3 weeks, and he didn't win a stage that year and didn't come away with the green. So it was a hollow afternoon on the Champs.
Had Robbie already won the green previous to that?
Yeah, 202. So
202,
he was defending the green jersey, and
Yep.
the next year in 204 he came back and won the green again.
And you guys were still in the same team?
I was that
Yep.
year, but I had an accident on stage 2 or stage 3 and did some major damage to my knee and pulled out of the tour very, very early. So he had some other guys there and they rode a great race, and he came away with a green that year.
And when you watch, as we record this, the tour's in full swing at the moment, and you watch, like Simon Gerrans come off and fracture his, collarbone, and must be, even though there's another Grand Tour around the corner, so to speak, it's still the Tour de France, and it must be, is it just bitterly disappointing?
Well, Gerrans, for example, is, he was riding the Tour in pure preparation for Rio, which was a couple of weeks after the Tour. The Tour finishes this weekend, and a rider like him would hope to win a stage along the way, but really get that top condition he needed for Rio. So it's very unfortunate for him and for anyone in that situation. Not only did he crash out of the Tour with a broken collarbone, he now doesn't go to Rio. So it's a catch-22. Do you prepare at a Grand Tour for that event or not? Do you prepare at home? And I don't think you can prepare at home the same way as you can at a Tour. So
just the intensity and
when you finish one of these races, you're very, very good for the next 4 or 5 weeks after it. If you come out of it not dead. Excuse me, and you hold your condition for 5 weeks after the Tour. But now there's 3 Grand Tours a year, and they're all about 5 or 6 weeks apart. And a lot of riders pick and choose which ones they're going to do in preparation for what they want to do after that.
And through this period, so what was your weekly training looking like? The highest echelon of cycling. What would a week look like for the team?
Depending on what part of the year.
Yeah.
The early stages of the year is the long, monotonous training of building a base for the season. And, we'd do that here on the Gold Coast. We'd never go back and join the camps in the winter in Europe. We'd stay here until the end of January. And, some weeks we'd ride up to 1,000k, 1,200k in preparation for the season. But once you've had a few races in your legs, you tend to recover and train on more specific stuff leading into an event.
Yeah, and that's all done out of a central hub as a team.
And the difference with cycling compared to other sports at the top end. Now you look at triathletes. You look at a Jan Frodeno. He might race between 10 and 15 days a year. We race 100 to 120. So you're going to be very consistent and always on a pretty good level. There's no, you can have 1 or 2 peaks through the year, but you then again have to be on a good level. So over the year we'd ride about 40,000k, and it was a pretty intense life.
And family and friends. 10 months in Europe, back on the Gold Coast or Australia for 2 months across summer. You're really basing this. You're really set up out of Europe, right?
Yeah. You are exactly. And back when I first started, again there was no internet, or there was internet, but it wasn't the big phenomenon it is now.
With dial up.
No social media. We'd line up at the phone booth, and that's how you keep in contact with people back in Oz. And it's changed. It's pretty good now.
And did your father ever? Because the 2 Tour de France's, but how many other Grand Tours were you there in that world?
7 Tour of Italy's and 2 Vueltas, so I had 11 in total.
Wow.
And my mum and dad came to 2 Giros and both tours.
Yeah.
They got to see it and experience it, and it was pretty good.
And I imagine your dad would have just been in mum.
Yeah.
Wow, remember that.
Yeah, he loved it. He loved it. He still thinks I'm 25 years of age and should be out there winning these races or triathlons.
Well, you almost are. You almost are. We'll go to that. And so, Nick, out of all the races at the highest level, is there one that stands out for you in terms of one race in particular? You'd be like, wow, that was a perfect day on the bike for you?
And it's not my personal achievement. It's probably the 2006 World Championships in Salzburg. And we're in the Australian team, and we had 2 leaders. We had Stuart O'Grady and Robbie McEwen. And we all got individual roles on what we had to do within the race, and I'd ride with Robbie all the time, and if there was any bike incident or a puncture or something needed, I was there with him. And I remember coming down to the final of the Worlds, and it's 260k or something, and he had a puncture with a lap and a half to go, and I was there with him, and we changed the wheel, and we got him back to the group, probably inside the last lap. And unfortunately, that was the one moment he could have become world champion, but 3 guys slipped away under the 800 metres to go. We went through a little tunnel that was completely dark, and one of the Spaniards had left the gap for his teammate, but when we came out of the tunnel on the other side, they had 25 metres, and Robbie went on to win the group sprint, a second behind these guys for 4th. So that was heart-wrenching after the second from 2002 in Zolder, but that was the year that we could have won the Worlds. I was never a part of a team that won the Worlds. I mean, we've only had one in Cadell Evans, and that was a pretty big moment. That was a pretty big day.
I think I might have a photo of that.
I think you do.
Yeah, and so that gives a whole other level to the. It's a great pic of you with Robbie on your wheel, you're towing him back up there. So it's amazing. After you'd list that as one of your most memorable rides, mate. In terms of any advice you'd give to people that are looking to get their best physically, whatever the pursuit that they're into? Yeah,
I think. My key word to everyone that asks me how do I go faster, what do I do, I'm always consistency. I always say to people starting, it's better to do 4 50-kilometre rides a week than 1 200k ride. Consistency's key, and it's just about getting up and you doing it each day. If you don't have enough time to do it each day, every second day, but consistency's key. It's better to do a little bit less, but do more. And that's a principle you lived through right through your career. Yeah. I always even later after my career, I started doing these triathlons. I did a couple of Ironmans, as you know, Brad, but I think the one thing is the day you overcook it, you struggle for the next couple of days. So I think you always should be within yourself, whether you're just starting out to try and lose weight and for your health, or whether you're trying to accomplish the best goal you can for your own personal endeavour. I think it's the best advice I can give to anyone. Be consistent. Yeah, that's great. Certainly from a perspective of my world as a physio, you see the result of inconsistency and sudden spikes in training loads, which are often one of those key things that produces injuries. Yeah. Nick, in terms of the training world, has there been through your career, obviously coming back to triathlon post your professional cycling career, but has there been a session that you used to do routinely that you knew would get you in form quickly? Yeah, and that was going behind the motorbike. We do motor pacing a lot in Belgium. We lived in Belgium for a long time, and we had a gentleman that would come around with his scooter, and he was a bit of a fan, and he'd just take us behind the motorbike for up to 150k, and once you get a few of those in your legs, it simulates a race, and it's really good training. I also love strength efforts. I think they're a great bang for your buck. They're the grassroots thing that everyone should be doing in their early preparation, but I believe in continuing it right through the season, and I think it simulates a gym session or something, but it's over-geared work on the bike, and that's always my go-to session to try and get condition. Yeah, right. And Nick, conditioning-wise, you did then pick up the swimming goggles and the racing flats again off the back of what was it like getting back into your first triathlon? Did you feel like you had gone full circle? Yeah, it was good. I mean, I stopped in 2008 and I didn't really do much at all, and then I went back to Europe for a few years, and we came back I think in 2013, and all of my friends are fit and healthy people, and now we're all getting a little bit older. Our kids are into it, so we're going away to these triathlons, and I went, all right, I'll do one. So I went to Mooloolaba, and I grabbed the bit by the teeth and really prepared well for it, and I went there and I went sub 2 hours in my first race for 20 years. So then after that, I had the...
And you won the Australian title in that race too, I believe.
Yeah, and then I had a bright idea I'd do the Ironman. So, then I prepared for Cairns Ironman and went up there and did that. But I must say the volume of training for these guys who do Ironman, I don't know how they continue to do it and get up and, do 3 or 4 a year. It's amazing.
And so, Nick, in terms of your sporting Mark 2 in life, triathlon again, what's next for you? Anything lined up? You had obviously the Ironman, a couple of Ironmans there, and some bad luck on one with a crash on the bike, and another with an injury and different things. But you're still looking at an Ironman at some point?
Down the road, I may. I mean, I qualified again in 2013 or 2014 because now in triathlon, this holy grail is Kona. And I've been there once and watched it only a few years ago, and I enjoyed watching it. But, I did qualify, and I put a deposit down on a house in Kona. And as you know, Brad, I had a hairline. What did I have? I had a stress fracture, didn't I?
Yeah, femoral stress fracture.
That's it. And couldn't go. So I rang the people who had the house, and I've got a credit for 5 years, but that's up next year. So I may have to pin the number on early next year and try and get a spot and go over just so I get to stay in that nice house, or I might go mid-year just for a surfing trip.
Oh, come on! And Nick, who's an athlete in your in this current world of sports that you admire? Who's one athlete?
It's one athlete on the top end. You mean?
Or just anyone in general? Anyone that jumps out?
Wow. I love a bloke like a Kelly Slater. I love those sort of guys who have stood the test of time, and they're still winning at the age of 41, 42 years of age. I think that's brilliant. People may look at surfing as not that physical, but I think I understand what it takes to be in that condition and have that longevity in your career. Yeah. Another guy is Valentino Rossi. You see him now still winning races at 41. I think it's brilliant. Anyone who has a long career of 20 years and over is a very dedicated person.
Yeah, I mean, look at Bernard Lagat, the exactly. Kenyan American, 41, winning the 5K on the track.
Yeah, brilliant.
52-second last lap.
Oh, it's amazing.
So, and Nick, well, I know that you've still got plenty of great years of physical performance in you, mate, and and thanks for certainly as a junior being part of my inspiration and sharing your story today. Really appreciate it.
Not a problem, Brad. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, mate. So, there you have it. I trust you enjoyed this episode of the Physical Performance Show. What a fascinating look into the world of professional cycling with Nick Gates. Coming up on episode 18 of the Physical Performance Show, I sit down with one of Australia's most recognisable female athletes. She's been a gladiator, Australian Ironwoman champion, also multiple 3 times winner of the grueling Coolangatta Gold, none other than Hayley Baderup. Until next time, keep pursuing your physical best performance. This has been the Physical Performance Show, and I'm Brad Beer.